The snow that night fell in slow, deliberate flakes, softening the world outside my window until everything looked pure and untouched. Inside my home, however, nothing felt pure. The light above the dining table glowed a little too warmly, casting gold on the silverware, the wine glasses, and the smile of the woman who had just called me vache laitée, an ugly cow, in perfect, elegant French. She thought I didn't understand. I smiled instead of reacting. I reached for the crystal glass beside my plate, the same one my husband Robert had given me on our wedding day in 1980. My fingers brushed the etched rim, tracing the faint chip that had appeared the day after his funeral. Some people keep photographs to remember. I kept this glass because it carried the sound of his laughter whenever it touched another. Across from me, Sophie Laurent lifted her own glass with the confidence of youth and victory. She was beautiful in the way that expensive perfume makes beauty louder. Andrew, my son, looked at her as if she were the sunrise after a long winter. I suppose that should have made me happy. Instead, a quiet tension settled in my stomach, one I tried to drown with a sip of wine. "Mom, isn't Sophie's accent charming?" he said. His eyes shone, completely unaware of the current running between us. "Yes," I answered softly. "It reminds me of the time Robert and I visited Provence. Such a beautiful language, when spoken with kindness." Sophie's fingers froze on her glass for the briefest moment. Then came that smile again, the kind people wear when they believe they have already won. What she didn't know was that I had spent my 20s teaching French literature to students who thought Balzac was a perfume brand. For 30 years, I had translated the words of poets and revolutionaries, words that carried pride, love, and defiance. Tonight, those same words would become my shield. As she leaned closer to Andrew, whispering something that made him laugh, I studied her reflection in the window behind her. It was strange how beauty could lose its shine when seen through the glass of suspicion. I wondered what she saw when she looked at me. A relic, perhaps. A burden. Or maybe a challenge. "Do you enjoy Wisconsin winters?" I asked her. "They are cold," she replied lightly. "In France, we prefer warmth, family dinners, candlelight, and good wine." I lifted my glass again. Yes, candlelight can reveal many things. The air shifted slightly. She caught my gaze then, perhaps for the first time realizing there was something behind my calm expression, a hint of warning, or perhaps she thought it was only the fatigue of age. Either way, her smile returned, polished and deliberate. That evening, I decided not to confront her. I would let her play her role, let her believe the stage belonged to her. Every performance needs an audience, and I had learned long ago how to sit quietly and wait for truth to arrive. I looked at Andrew. His laughter filled the room, open and warm. He had his father's voice, that same baritone tone that once made me believe I could endure anything. He deserved happiness, I told myself, even if it came wrapped in deceit. The snow outside thickened, pressing its silence against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang. I thought of the Christmases Robert and I used to spend by the lake, of how the world had seemed larger when he was alive. Now, it felt smaller and colder, as if the air itself belonged to Sophie's rhythm. When she excused herself to make a phone call in French, I listened. Her voice floated from the hallway, soft and musical, but the words were sharp beneath the melody. She spoke about me, about the house, about the value of the land, and about Andrew being too sentimental. I could have stepped forward then and ended her game. I could have reminded her that not all widows are fragile and not all mothers are blind, but I waited, because sometimes silence is the sharpest blade. I returned to the table and refilled her glass, letting the wine swirl like red smoke under the chandelier. When she came back, she looked surprised to see it waiting for her. I raised my own glass and said in perfect French, "To honesty, the rarest luxury in any language." Her smile faltered. The color drained slightly from her face. Andrew, still unaware, toasted along with us. That was the moment I knew. This dinner would not end the way she imagined. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the lake in white. Inside, a quiet storm began to rise. Beneath the years of patience and politeness, something long forgotten began to awaken. I was not just Andrew's mother. I was Helen Whitaker, a woman who had spent her life building, teaching, and forgiving. And I was done being underestimated, so I smiled again, the same smile I had given her when she insulted me. Only this time, it carried a promise. Tonight, I would let her finish her performance. And when the final act came, she would realize that I had understood every word. When my old crystal glass finally slipped from my hand, whether by accident or intention, it would not just shatter. It would mark the beginning of the truth. If you have ever been underestimated or disrespected but chose silence for the sake of someone you love, leave a comment below to share your story. At Grandma's final chapter, we tell emotional, meaningful stories that celebrate the strength and wisdom of older adults. Subscribe, like, and share to receive new stories every day. Stories that remind us that aging is not about fading away, but about standing tall with dignity and grace until the very last chapter. The night of the dinner, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. The kitchen glowed with a kind of warmth that winter nights rarely allowed. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples drifted through the air, mingling with the faint hum of the old radiator that had been with me since Andrew was in high school. The table was set with quiet care, a white lace tablecloth, my mother's old silverware, and the good china that I only brought out for birthdays and Christmases. Tonight was special, I told myself. My son had finally found someone to share his life with. Sophie had insisted on helping. Her laughter floated softly as she carried plates from the counter to the table. She moved with a kind of grace that came from knowing she was being watched. Everything about her was deliberate. The way she brushed her hair behind her ear, the gentle tilt of her head when she listened, the rhythm of her steps on the wooden floor. She was, as people like to say, charmingly Parisian. I watched her pour cider into the crystal glasses. "Thank you, Sophie," I said, trying to match her politeness. "It is my pleasure, Helen," she replied, her accent turning my name into something almost musical. "You have such a beautiful home. It feels very American, cozy." I smiled at that. It's nothing special, but it has held a lot of memories. Andrew came in then, cheeks flushed from the cold, his hair dusted with melting snow. He looked happier than I had seen him in years. "Smells amazing in here," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Sophie made the glaze for the ham. You'll love it." "I'm sure I will," I said, and I meant it. For a moment, everything felt simple again. As we sat down to eat, the house seemed to settle around us, the way it used to when Robert and I hosted neighbors for Sunday dinners. The conversation flowed easily. Sophie spoke of Paris, of her parents' vineyard in Bordeaux, of her studies in architecture, and how she met Andrew at a conference in Chicago. Her words painted a life of refinement and culture, one that seemed to sparkle with light and possibility. Andrew listened like a man under a spell. I could see how deeply he adored her. Every time she laughed, his eyes softened. Every time she touched his hand, he leaned a little closer. I felt an unexpected swell of relief, even gratitude. Maybe this woman, with her polished manners and effortless poise, would bring balance to his restless life. Maybe she would give him what I no longer could, a sense of belonging. Sophie reached for a plate near me. "May I help you serve, Helen?" she asked. "Of course," I said. "There are extra napkins by the counter." As she turned away, I caught her reflection in the window. For just an instant, I saw something different in her eyes. Not malice exactly, but calculation. It was a look I recognized well, the kind I used to see in the best students, those who smiled while secretly measuring the distance between obedience and advantage. Still, I brushed the thought aside. I had taught long enough to know that people often wear masks at first meetings. Perhaps she was nervous. Perhaps I was simply too protective. Sophie returned with the napkins and began folding them neatly beside each plate. "Your son is a wonderful man," she said. "You must be proud." "I am," I said softly. "He has always had a good heart." She smiled again, her expression kind, her tone light. "He told me how much you love this house. I can see why. It has character, old walls, old stories. You can feel the history." There was something about the way she said old that lingered in the air, but Andrew spoke up before I could dwell on it. "She's right, Mom. The place feels alive because of you." The warmth in his voice dissolved the unease that had begun to gather. I looked at the two of them and felt the quiet pull of hope. Maybe I was wrong to judge her so quickly. Maybe the earlier moment the insult spoken in another tongue had been nothing more than a misunderstanding. After all, people say strange things when nervous. Dinner went on in soft rhythm. The clink of forks, the murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. Sophie complimented the apple pie I had baked that morning. She asked about my years as a teacher, and I told her a few stories of the students who had changed me, the lessons that time had carved into my heart. When I spoke of Robert, she listened attentively, her eyes wide, her voice gentle. "You must miss him," she said. "Every day," I replied. For a moment, her face softened, and I thought I saw genuine empathy. It stirred something inside me, something fragile and almost forgotten. The simple pleasure of being understood, the comfort of believing someone cared. Andrew raised his glass. "To family," he said. "To family," we echoed, and the glasses touched lightly in the candlelight. The sound was bright, delicate, like the beginning of forgiveness. As the evening went on, Sophie leaned toward me and asked about the recipes, the lace curtains, the framed photographs. She seemed eager to know everything, to belong, and I wanted her to. I wanted to believe this was the woman my son had been waiting for. When she laughed, the house felt younger. When she thanked me for dinner, I felt that old ache of loneliness quiet down. I had spent so many nights alone since Robert's passing that I had almost forgotten what laughter in a kitchen sounded like. I did not see the shadow yet. I only saw the light it pretended to cast. After Andrew drove her back to her hotel that night, I stood by the window watching the snow fall again. The house was still warm, filled with the lingering scent of cinnamon and cider. On the table, 3 empty glasses caught the light, and for a moment I thought the evening had been a success. I gathered the plates, humming softly, almost smiling. Maybe this time, things would be different. Maybe kindness could win after all. But as I reached for Sophie's glass to wash it, I noticed a faint lipstick mark on the rim, scarlet red. It caught the light in a strange way, like a warning whispered too quietly to be heard. I wiped it clean, placed it beside the others, and turned off the light. The warmth in the room remained, but something in me sensed that it would not last. The storm had not yet begun, but the air was already changing. Tomorrow, I would learn that warmth can be the most deceptive form of silence. Lake Madison, Wisconsin, later that same night. The night had settled into a gentle hush. The last of the snowflakes drifted against the window, melting into the glass like fading memories. Andrew had left the table to fetch a folder from his car, still buzzing with excitement about the renovation project he wanted to show Sophie. His laughter echoed faintly down the hallway before the front door closed behind him. For the first time that evening, the house was quiet enough for me to hear the faint ticking of the wall clock. It was a familiar rhythm, steady and comforting. I began gathering the plates, stacking them neatly near the sink. The smell of roasted ham and apple glaze lingered in the air, a sweet heaviness that reminded me of Christmas dinners long ago. Sophie's voice drifted into the kitchen from the doorway. At first it was low, almost tender. I thought she was speaking to Andrew, but then I realized she was on the phone. The cadence of her words was unmistakably French, the kind of French that carried not poetry, but purpose. I froze, one hand on the edge of the counter, listening before I even understood why. "Oui, je l'ai rencontré. Sa mère est douce, vulnérable et riche." My heart stopped for a moment. Her tone was light, even playful, but the words sliced clean through the warmth that had filled the evening. His mother is sweet, vulnerable, and rich. The words echoed inside me, louder with every breath. I felt something tighten in my chest, an old familiar ache that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with betrayal. She kept talking. Her voice was hushed, as if she believed the walls would protect her secrets. "Oui, je pense qu'il sera facile. Andrew est amoureux. Elle ne posera pas de questions." He is in love. She will not ask questions. I looked down at the porcelain plate in my hands. It was part of a set called Blue Magnolia, a wedding gift from Robert's mother. Each plate had a soft blue flower hand painted in the center. I had only used them on special occasions, never daring to let them near careless hands. But now my fingers trembled around its delicate rim. The plate felt heavier than it should have, as if carrying the weight of every year I had spent trying to protect my son from the world's cruelties. The clock kept ticking. Sophie's voice continued, smooth and confident. Non, elle ne soupçonne rien. Elle m'aime déjà. Je te dis, c'est une maison parfaite. Et il y a ce terrain, près du lac. I did not need to translate every word to understand her meaning. She was describing my home, my life, my son, all of it reduced to a transaction. Something inside me cracked. It was not anger, not yet. It was disbelief, sharp and cold. I had been foolish enough to hope again. Foolish enough to believe in warmth after years of silence. The plate slipped. It struck the floor with a sharp, shattering sound that seemed too loud for the small kitchen. The porcelain burst into fragments, the painted magnolia blooming one last time before disappearing into pieces. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of her voice stopped mid-sentence. Then I heard her quick steps, her heels tapping lightly on the tile. "Helen?" she called, her tone suddenly gentle, concerned. "Are you all right?" I knelt slowly, gathering the broken pieces with my bare hands. One edge caught my finger, a thin line of blood rising instantly. It stung, but the pain felt strangely grounding. When I looked up, she was standing in the doorway, phone still in hand. Her face was carefully composed, but I saw the flicker of panic behind her eyes. "I am so sorry," I said quietly. "My hands must have slipped. I am not as steady as I used to be." Sophie blinked, searching for a response. "It happens," she said quickly. "Let me help you." I shook my head. "No, thank you. I'll manage." I dropped the shards into the bin, one by one, each sound crisp and final. Then I rinsed my hands under the tap and dried them on a towel embroidered with my initials, a wedding gift from decades ago. Behind me, Sophie lingered. The silence between us had shifted. It was no longer polite or uncertain. It was sharp-edged, like glass hidden beneath soft snow. "You have a lovely home," she said again, her voice a little too bright. "And such delicate dishes. Are they antique?" "They were," I replied, folding the towel. "They belonged to my mother-in-law. She used to say that some things were never meant to be replaced." Her smile faltered. I turned then, meeting her gaze. For a moment, we stood there, two women separated by more than years or culture. I saw the confidence flicker in her eyes, just for an instant, replaced by the smallest trace of fear. "Accidents happen," I said softly. "But sometimes, they tell us what is already broken." Her lips parted as if to respond, but Andrew's footsteps sounded from the front door before she could speak. His cheerful voice filled the air again. "You two okay?" I heard something break. I forced a smile. "It was nothing, darling." Adjust my clumsy hands. Sophie's expression brightened instantly, her performance flawless once more. "Your mother is too modest," she said lightly. "We were just talking about how careful she is with everything." Andrew laughed and joined us at the table, oblivious to the current swirling beneath the calm surface. We finished the evening as if nothing had happened. The plates were cleared, the cider poured again. The conversation returned to safe and pleasant things. But I could feel Sophie watching me now, measuring me, wondering how much I had understood. Later, after they left, I walked back into the kitchen. The broken porcelain still glittered faintly in the bin under the light. I took one piece out and held it in my palm, tracing the blue edge with my thumb. Blue magnolia, a flower that symbolized dignity and endurance. My mother-in-law had once told me that magnolias bloom even after storms. Outside, the wind rose, brushing against the windows like restless fingers. I placed the shard on the windowsill, next to the old crystal glass from earlier. Two symbols now, the glass of memory and the plate of truth. The storm had not yet arrived, but I could feel it gathering in the distance, and this time I was ready. Helen's study, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. The house had long gone quiet, but sleep refused to visit. The clock in the hallway struck 11, each chime echoing through the empty rooms like the slow, deliberate steps of time itself. The warmth from the dinner had faded, replaced by a stillness that pressed against the walls. I sat in Robert's old study, the room that had remained almost untouched since his passing. The faint smell of varnish and paper still lingered there, along with the quiet dignity that had always surrounded him. Shelves of worn books lined the walls, their spines faded from decades of sunlight. A globe rested on the side table, turned forever toward the Atlantic. Above the desk hung our wedding photograph, framed in walnut, its glass slightly clouded with age. In the photo, I was 24, smiling with the certainty of someone who believed that love could hold back every storm. Robert stood beside me, confident and kind, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. 40 years later, I sat beneath that same image, wondering what he would have said if he had been there tonight. The desk lamp cast a circle of golden light that barely reached the corners of the room. It illuminated the things that had outlasted him: the brass pen holder, a cracked leather notebook, and the pendulum clock he had repaired one winter when the gears refused to turn. I could still hear him humming as he worked, patient and focused, his hands steady even when time itself seemed fragile. The clock still ticked now, steady and faithful, but the sound no longer comforted me. It measured something different. Not time, but distance. The distance between what I believed and what I had just learned. I picked up the leather notebook, the one he had once used to write his lesson plans. His handwriting, firm and deliberate, filled the pages with neat lines of ink. History notes, small quotes from philosophers, reminders written in his tidy hand. Observe before you act. I smiled faintly. Robert had always believed that wisdom lived in restraint. He used to tell me that silence, when chosen, was never weakness. You can learn more from listening to what people do not say, he once told me, than from all the words they throw into the air. Tonight, I finally understood what he meant. Earlier that evening, I had stood in my own kitchen and heard a stranger dissect my life in another language. The words were polite, even melodic, yet every syllable carried a blade. She had looked at me with admiration and calculation, like a student who knew the test before the teacher did. And I, foolishly, had believed in her grace. I leaned back in the old chair. Its leather creaked softly beneath my weight. The warmth from the desk lamp touched my hands, but inside, I felt only the chill of realization. For decades, I had taught my students that knowledge was power. I had told them to seek truth, to question, to speak up when the world tried to silence them. But that night, sitting alone in Robert's study, I discovered another kind of strength, the kind that comes from waiting, from watching, from choosing not to speak until the right moment arrives. Outside, the snow had stopped falling. The world was pale and still beneath the moonlight. Through the window, I could see the frozen surface of Lake Madison shimmering faintly under the stars. Everything looked peaceful, but I knew better. Stillness could hide many things. I ran my fingers across the edge of the desk, tracing the small scratches Robert had left behind. My reflection in the dark window looked older than I remembered. Lines carved by years of love and loss marked my face, but there was something else there too, something I had not seen in a long time. Clarity. I thought about Andrew, my son, with his open heart and earnest eyes. He had inherited his father's kindness, but not his caution. He believed people at their word. He wanted to build, to trust, to love without calculation. And Sophie had seen that in him, the same way I once had. She had found his gentleness and decided it was something she could use. I wanted to tell him everything. The urge rose like a wave, fierce and immediate. I imagined the look on his face, the hurt, the disbelief. He would think I was jealous, or worse, bitter. He would defend her, as lovers always do. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. No, I would not tell him. Not yet. I reached for the clock on the shelf and adjusted the pendulum, a habit Robert used to call my restless ritual. The pendulum swung gently, its motion steady and hypnotic. Time, patient as ever, waited for me to decide. I whispered into the quiet room, "I will wait." The sound of my own voice startled me. It was calm, low, but there was something new in it. A tone I had not heard since my teaching days, the voice of someone who knows what she must do. I would watch Sophie. I would listen. I would collect her words the way a teacher collects papers, sorting through them until the truth revealed itself. When the time came, I would not need anger or accusation. I would only need clarity. From the drawer, I took a small notebook and wrote a single line on the first page. Knowledge is power, but silence is the test of strength. I closed it carefully and placed it beside the clock. The house was utterly still now. The only sound was the ticking of the pendulum and the faint whisper of the wind moving across the lake. I turned off the lamp, letting the darkness fill the room. As I stood to leave, I paused by the wedding photograph. I touched the edge of the frame, tracing the faces frozen in time. "You were right, Robert," I said softly. "Listening tells more truth than speaking ever could." Down the hallway, the floorboards creaked beneath my steps. The air smelled faintly of wax and old pine. I passed the closed door to Andrew's old room and lingered for a moment, listening to the silence inside. It was strange how empty a house could feel, even when the walls remembered every voice that had ever filled it. In the kitchen, the broken blue magnolia plate still lay in the bin. The moonlight from the window glinted on its shards, catching the faint blue of the painted flower. I knelt and picked up one piece, cold and smooth between my fingers. I set it gently on the counter beside the crystal glass, two symbols of what had been lost and what was about to be found. When I finally went to bed, dawn was only a few hours away, but I knew sleep would not come. I did not need it. For the first time in years, I felt awake. Late winter, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. The following morning arrived pale and uncertain. The sky hung low over the lake, the color of cold ash. I had not slept, yet my mind felt sharper than it had in years. The quiet determination that had taken root in Robert's study the night before now guided every movement I made. I brewed a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Sophie had laughed just hours earlier. I opened my notebook and wrote a single name at the top of the page: Sophie Laurent. The letters looked harmless on paper, elegant even. But behind that name, I sensed a labyrinth. I started with what little I knew. She said she had studied architecture in Paris. She mentioned her family owned a vineyard in Bordeaux. She spoke of her father's company, though she never said its name. And when she told Andrew she worked remotely, she avoided saying for whom. Each detail was precise enough to sound true, yet vague enough to vanish when questioned. I needed help. That afternoon, I called my niece, Emily. She was 32, sharp-minded, and currently stationed in Washington as a junior officer at the Department of State. I had always admired her curiosity, the kind that looked beyond words to find what was hidden beneath them. When she answered, her voice was warm and familiar. "Aunt Helen, it's been too long." "I know, dear," I said softly. "And I'm afraid I'm calling for a reason that isn't entirely pleasant." Within minutes, I told her what had happened. Not everything, just enough. The insult, the French phone call, the unease that had settled into my bones. Emily listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said carefully, "You think she might not be who she says she is?" "I don't want to accuse anyone," I replied, "but something isn't right. Could you perhaps look into her background for me?" Quietly. There was a pause. Then, "I can check public records and visa data, but if she entered the country recently, it might take time. What's her full name again?" "Sophie Laurent. She says she's from France. Mid-30s, maybe younger." "I'll see what I can find," Emily said. "And Aunt Helen, be careful. If she's hiding something, don't confront her alone." I promised her I wouldn't, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure I meant it. By evening, Emily called back. "I've done a preliminary check. There's no French national named Sophie Laurent matching that description with a valid visa or permanent residency. The name is too common, but I can't find any trace of her linked to Madison or Chicago. My fingers tightened around the receiver. So she might be using a false identity. It's possible, but you should talk to someone local, someone who can dig deeper than I can. That was how I found myself meeting Tom Rivers 2 days later. Tom was a retired detective who had once helped the sheriff's department with missing person cases. He was in his late 50s, broad-shouldered, with eyes that carried both fatigue and compassion. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a steady gaze. "Emily said you needed a discreet inquiry," he said. "You can call me Tom, or Marcus if you prefer something that doesn't raise eyebrows." We met at a small cafe near the library, where the smell of burnt espresso and snow-damp coats filled the air. I handed him a small envelope containing the few details I had. Sophie's phone number, her supposed French address written on a piece of stationery, and a photo I had taken at dinner. Tom studied the photo for a long moment. Pretty. Polished. The kind of woman who could walk into any room and make you believe she belonged there. She knew how to charm people, I said quietly. Especially my son. He nodded. "I'll start with her number and the name she gave you. Might take a few days. These kinds of people usually leave breadcrumbs." When I asked what he meant, he smiled faintly. "They repeat patterns, same words, same stories, different names. I've seen it before." 3 days later, he called. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, his tone different now, more careful. "I've found something, or rather, I haven't found what I should have." He explained that the phone number was registered under a temporary US SIM card purchased in Chicago, paid in cash. The French address Sophie had given on her stationery belonged to an empty apartment in Lyon that had been unoccupied for nearly 2 years. I listened in silence as he continued. "There's no record of her employment in the US, no bank accounts under that name, no trace in local databases, but I did find something interesting while cross-referencing. 2 other cases in Texas and Oregon from last year. Both involved women using European identities, French, Austrian, sometimes Italian. Each woman began a relationship with a middle-aged professional man, moved quickly toward engagement, and vanished once financial access was granted." A cold weight settled in my stomach. Were the victims hurt? One of them lost nearly $200,000. The other lost her husband. He died of a heart attack a month after she disappeared. I gripped the edge of the table. The hum of the cafe faded around me, replaced by the steady beat of my pulse in my ears. Tom's voice softened. "Mrs. Whitaker, I think what you're dealing with isn't just one person, it's a ring. They target families with assets, usually where the parent or widowed spouse still controls property. The woman gains the son's trust, the paperwork shifts slowly, and by the time anyone notices, it's too late." I stared out the window, where the snow had begun to fall again. The flakes landed softly on the glass, but the air felt heavier, darker. "This isn't about love," I said finally. "It's a business." Tom nodded. "A cruel one. But if we move carefully, we might expose it before it reaches your son." That night, back in Robert's study, I opened my notebook again. The page where I had written Sophie's name now felt like an accusation. I added a new line beneath it. "This is not just about me." The truth was larger, colder, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. I thought of the other victims, of the families who had lost everything, some who would never even learn the real name of the woman who destroyed them. I closed the notebook and whispered into the quiet room, "Not again." The decision settled in me with a strange calm. I would not confront Sophie yet. I would wait, watch, and gather what I needed. But this time, my silence would not be passive. It would be deliberate, sharp, and filled with purpose. Outside, the snowstorm thickened, swirling against the windows in restless spirals. Somewhere beyond that curtain of white, another family was probably sitting at another dinner table, listening to the same kind of laughter I once mistook for kindness. The storm had arrived, and I was ready to face it. If you have ever seen love used as a weapon, or watched someone fall victim to trust disguised as affection, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes, your story can help save someone else from a heartbreak they do not yet see coming. A week later, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. The week that followed was one of forced calm. On the surface, everything appeared normal. Andrew still called every morning to check on me, cheerful and devoted as always. Sophie continued her routine of charm, sending texts filled with heart emojis and promises to bring her parents to meet me soon. It was a performance carefully rehearsed, and I had learned to play my role within it. By the time she called to suggest another dinner, I had already prepared my answer. "Of course, dear," I said sweetly. "It will be lovely to meet your family." That evening, I set the table as if for a celebration. The blue magnolia plates had been replaced by a simpler white porcelain set. The crystal glasses gleamed beneath the dining room light, polished until they caught the reflection of every movement in the room. I wanted everything perfect. Deception, I had learned, thrived on comfort. Andrew arrived first, carrying a bouquet of lilies, his smile unguarded and full of hope. "Mom, you're going to love them," he said. "They flew in from France yesterday." "I'm sure I will," I replied, smoothing the tablecloth. "Tell me again, where in France are they from?" He hesitated. "Sophie said Marseille, I think. Or maybe somewhere nearby." I nodded, hiding the small spark of confirmation that lit within me. Marseille and Paris were not easily confused, not by anyone truly French. When the doorbell rang, the room seemed to hold its breath. Sophie entered first, radiant as ever, her dark coat brushing against the doorway. Behind her were two people, a man and a woman, both immaculately dressed, both smiling too widely. "Madame Whitaker," Sophie said warmly. "May I introduce my parents, Alain and Mireille Laurent?" I stepped forward, extending my hand. "Bienvenue," I said. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you both." For the briefest second, something flickered in their eyes, a hesitation, a misstep. Then the man recovered with a booming laugh. "Ah, madame, your accent is very good." It is always a joy to meet someone who loves our language. "Merci," I replied evenly. It has been many years since I studied in Lyon, but I still try to keep it alive. Their smiles stiffened. We moved to the table, where the smell of roasted chicken and thyme filled the air. The conversation began easily, carefully choreographed by Sophie. Her father spoke of France with broad strokes, mentioning vineyards and countryside picnics. Her mother nodded at all the right moments, but rarely added details. I watched them as I served the wine. There was something rehearsed about their rhythm, as if they were following a script written by someone who had only read about France in travel magazines. "So, Monsieur Laurent," I said casually in French, "Marseille must be lovely this time of year. The markets near the old port, the smell of bouillabaisse, the sound of the sea. I miss it terribly." He blinked. "Ah, yes, Marseille. Very warm." I tilted my head slightly. I remember it differently. When I lived there, the mistral wind was cold enough to cut through a wool coat. His fork paused in midair. For a moment, the table fell silent. Sophie's smile faltered just enough for me to notice. Her mother's fingers tightened around her glass. I continued gently, as if unaware of the tension. "And tell me, Madame Laurent, what is your favorite street in Marseille? I always loved Rue Paradis. My husband and I walked there once at sunset." The woman's lips parted, but no words came. She looked at her husband, then at Sophie, who jumped in quickly. "My parents prefer the countryside," she said with forced lightness. "They do not go to the city often." I smiled, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make them uneasy. "Of course," I said finally, "city life can be exhausting." As I leaned back in my chair, my eyes caught the old notebook on the sideboard. Its brown leather cover was cracked, its corners softened by years of use. My French notebook. I had found it that morning in a box of old teaching materials, still marked with underlined verbs and handwritten notes from my student days in Lyon. When I placed it on the table earlier, I did not intend to use it as a weapon. But now, its presence felt symbolic, a quiet reminder of who I had been long before they walked into my home. I turned to Sophie's parents again. "You must have enjoyed your flight," I said, switching to flawless French. "How long did it take from Paris to Chicago? About 8 hours, yes?" The man hesitated again before answering. Yes, of course. From Paris." "Strange," I said, still in French, my tone pleasant. "Andrew mentioned you were from Marseille." The silence this time was heavy. Alain glanced at Sophie. Mireille looked down at her plate. The air thickened, charged with something unsaid. It was Sophie who broke it. "Mother, father," she said softly, forcing a laugh. "You know how Americans love details. They ask about everything." Her voice was smooth, but her hand trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. I watched her carefully, the way she avoided meeting my eyes. "Details are the soul of truth," I said. "Without them, stories fall apart." Her parents said little after that. The rest of dinner unfolded in a strained politeness. Andrew, ever trusting, did not seem to notice the undercurrent. He spoke of his work, of plans for the new year, of how much he looked forward to visiting France someday. Each word from him felt like a thread I was desperate to keep from tangling. After dessert, the Laurents thanked me for the meal. As they stood to leave, the man shook my hand with forced warmth. "It was delightful to meet you, madame," he said. "Likewise," I replied. "Perhaps next time we can talk about Lyon. It is closer to my heart than Paris or Marseille." His grip faltered for half a second before he released me. They left quickly after that, their footsteps fading into the night. When the door closed, the house felt suddenly larger, emptier. Andrew looked puzzled. "Mom, are you all right? You were awfully quiet tonight." "I'm fine, dear," I said, touching his arm. "Just tired. Too much excitement for one evening." He kissed my cheek and promised to call the next day. When he was gone, I went to the table and picked up the French notebook. Its pages smelled faintly of dust and ink. On the first page, I had once written a quote from Voltaire. "Truth is not always beautiful, but the desire for it is." I turned off the dining room light and stood by the window. Outside, the snow reflected the glow of the street lamps, soft but cold. I thought of their eyes, the flicker of panic, the silent exchange of fear. That was when I knew I had touched the truth's surface. They were not her parents, they were actors or accomplices or both. And Sophie, for all her grace and poise, had made her first mistake. She believed that age meant blindness. What she did not know was that I had spent my life teaching people to read between the lines. And now, for the first time, I was grading her performance. It was perfect, until it wasn't. Helen's house, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. By dusk, the lake was a sheet of pewter, the kind of winter stillness that makes every light in a house feel like a promise. I moved through the kitchen with the practiced rhythm of 1,000 dinners. Garlic and rosemary warmed the air, the roast turning golden beneath a crust of butter. Nat King Cole drifted from the old radio on the shelf, the soft crackle between notes, a comfort I had known since Andrew was a boy. The tree in the living room shimmered with small white bulbs, a constellation of quiet memories. On the mantel, the crystal glass waited where I had placed it at the start of December, a private vigil for all that had been and all that might still be saved. Andrew arrived first, stamping snow from his boots, cheeks pink with the cold. He hugged me longer than usual. I felt the shape of a small box in his coat pocket, the steady thud of his heart against my shoulder. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright. "Not yet," I said gently, and he laughed, embarrassed and happy. Sophie came soon after, wrapped in a long red coat that opened to a satin dress the color of a ripe pomegranate. Her hair caught the light when she turned, and for a moment I could almost admire her again. She kissed my cheek with a practiced tenderness and brought a bottle of wine I would later learn was purchased that afternoon at the grocery store 3 blocks away. "You look beautiful," Andrew said, and she did. Beauty can be a blade wrapped in ribbon. We ate in a hush that felt ceremonial. The plates filled and emptied. Conversation moved through safe rooms and closed doors. Sophie asked about old traditions, about the ornaments Andrew had made in school, about the garland that had survived 3 decades of Christmases. She touched everything lightly, as if claiming it by memory. I let her. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. I swallowed the last of my water and set the crystal glass back on the mantel, careful, controlled. Nat King Cole slipped into silence between tracks. The house listened with me. Andrew stood, anxious and eager. His hand brushed the pocket where the ring lay hidden. It had belonged to his grandmother, a simple setting with a stubborn shine. He had taken it from my jewelry box that afternoon with a reverence that made me ache. "I need a minute," he said, voice soft, and disappeared down the hall. I watched Sophie watch him, the slight calculation in the turn of her wrist, the microsecond of impatience hidden beneath a smile. The bell rang again, longer. I crossed the room and opened the door. Agent Sarah Monroe stood on the porch wearing a winter coat that had seen too many long nights and too many hard truths. Snow clung to the edge of her collar. She greeted me with a nod sharp enough to be felt. Behind her, 2 officers waited in the drifting light. We had spoken twice that week, brief calls that traded certainty for timing. Now her eyes asked the final question. "Now," I whispered and stepped aside. She crossed the threshold without ceremony. The officers held back, the kind of restraint that means a plan is already in motion. Nat King Cole found his voice again from the radio, chestnuts and open fires, and all the warmth the world can pretend. Sophie turned, the performance already forming on her lips. Agent Monroe raised a hand before the first line could fall. "Good evening," she said, voice even, almost cordial. She reached into her coat and showed the badge. "Sarah Monroe, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Are you Miss Sophie Laurent, citizen of France, born in Lyon, graduate of the École d'Architecture de Paris, daughter of Alain and Mireille Laurent of Marseille?" The list hung in the air like a held breath. Sophie's smile held for 1 heartbeat longer, then something behind her eyes shuddered. She did not answer. The room grew small around us, the smell of rosemary suddenly too strong. Andrew returned from the hallway and stopped short. "What is this?" he asked, looking from the badge to Sophie, then to me. Agent Monroe did not turn. "Miss Laurent, I will ask again, for the record." Silence. Sophie's gaze flicked once to the window, once to the door, once to the small box inside Andrew's pocket. Then she dropped the mask with the clean efficiency of a hand removing a glove. "Try again," Agent Monroe said, voice softer now, as if the truth were a favor we might all grant one another. "Miss Christina Marsh, born in Santa Rosa, California, currently operating under a fraudulent European identity connected with 2 investigations in Texas and Oregon." Andrew made a small sound, the kind a child makes when waking from a dream. Sophie's shoulders lowered a fraction, not in surrender, but in recalibration. "I would like a lawyer," she said in a neutral American accent, crisp and cold. She turned to Andrew with a look that might have been affection if it had not been so precise. "I did what men want to believe. That is all." The words struck him like ice water. I saw him reach for the back of a chair, saw the color drain from his face, saw the world he had been building crack along lines he had not known were there. "Christina," Agent Monroe said, calling her by the name she could not outrun, "we have you on taped calls with an associate in Chicago. We have bank transfers tied to prepaid cards. We have 2 statements from victims, both of whom described you before they ever met one another. You can cooperate or you can wait for the federal warrant to swallow the rest." For a moment, I thought Sophie might run. The doorway was clear. The porch light cast a pale path across the snow, but she measured the distance, measured the angles, and stayed very still. Andrew found his voice. "Tell me it is not true," he said. "Tell me this is a mistake." Sophie looked at him, and for the first time since I had met her, I saw a human flicker that was not manufactured, not guilt, exactly, not love, a recognition of the fragile place where her story had folded into his. "If you want me to say it," she answered, "I will, but it will not help you." Agent Monroe stepped forward. "We are done pretending," she said. "Christina Marsh, you are not under arrest at this moment. You are being questioned in connection with an ongoing investigation. If you attempt to leave, you will be detained." The room held its breath again. Andrew stared at the small box in his hand, the one he had planned to open under the glow of tree lights. His fingers shook. He looked up at me, at the badge, at Sophie, at the life that had been waiting in the next room. "I would never have hurt you," Sophie said. And perhaps in a narrow definition she meant it. Harm to her was a number that could be returned if it kept the machine turning. Harm to him was irrelevant as long as the signatures happened. The old radio clicked and the next song began. The first chord was so familiar that it felt like memory. My eyes moved to the mantel, to the crystal glass waiting in its careful place. A lifetime of dinners and holidays and lessons lived inside that hollow circle. Sophie reached for her coat as if to anchor herself. The movement brushed the edge of the mantel. The glass tipped, hesitated, and fell. It struck the hearth and shattered into a scatter of bright fragments. The sound cut through the room with a clarity that left no room for doubt. Andrew flinched as if something inside him had broken with it. I closed my eyes and saw our wedding day, saw Robert's hands, saw every season that had carried us to this moment. Agent Monroe did not move. Sophie did not apologize. The shards lay glittering like a field of small stars. Andrew's voice was a whisper. How much of it was real? Sophie's answer was almost kind. Enough to be convincing. The officers stepped into the doorway. The decision had been made at a table in a government office days ago, and now it simply walked the distance between paperwork and people. Agent Monroe spoke to me without taking her eyes off Sophie. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitaker. Your notes and recordings will be entered into the file. We will need statements in the morning." I nodded. Words felt unnecessary. The truth was a shape in the room now, visible and undeniable. Sophie lifted her chin. "I will come," she said, still in that cold American voice. "I am not running." "No," Agent Monroe said. "Not tonight." They left together into the snow and the streetlight. The air in the house settled by degrees, like a body remembering how to breathe. Andrew stood very still, the small box in his hand suddenly heavy and useless. He opened it as if to prove something, as if to preserve one intact thing in a room full of breakage. The ring caught the tree lights and threw them back in quiet flashes. "I should have known," he said. His voice was raw, the voice of a man who has found the bottom of belief. "You trusted," I said. "That is not a crime." He looked at the glass scattered across the hearth. "We can glue it," he said, a reflex from childhood. A boy who once fixed toys with tape because he believed in repair. "Not this," I answered. We knelt together and picked up the pieces. The shards were tiny and bright, and every touch brought a new reflection. Somewhere in the radio, Nat King Cole kept singing about peace. The lake outside was a black mirror. When the last fragment lay in the trash, Andrew leaned his forehead against my shoulder. I felt the weight of him, the grief gathering, the beginning of understanding. "It is over," I said, though I knew it was not. Investigations live longer than evenings. Paper takes time to do what the heart does in a single breath. He nodded and slipped the ring back into its box. He did not put it in his pocket. He set it on the mantel where the glass had stood, a promise returned to safekeeping. In the window's reflection, I saw us both, smaller than the tree, smaller than the room, but standing. The house was still full of warm light, and the smell of roasted garlic still clung to the air. Outside, the snow fell with the quiet certainty of winter. Christmas Eve continued, imperfect and honest. The storm had passed through the center of the room and left us awake. Early January, Lake Madison, Wisconsin. The new year arrived quietly, without fireworks or laughter. The lake outside my window had frozen into stillness, a mirror that reflected nothing but pale sky. The Christmas tree was gone, the lights stored in boxes, yet a faint trace of pine still lingered in the house. I moved through the rooms as one might move through the ruins of a battle that no one else remembered. For days, Andrew had not spoken to me. His silence was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of betrayal. I understood it, even accepted it. The line between protection and deception is thin, and I had crossed it. When he finally came to the house that Sunday, I knew the conversation would not be gentle. He did not knock. He opened the door, the cold wind following him inside, and stood there for a moment before closing it behind him. His face was pale from the weather, his eyes red from sleeplessness. "Mom," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I nodded. "Yes, we do." We sat at the kitchen table where everything had begun. The light from the window fell between us, sharp and pale, cutting the room into two halves that no longer felt connected. He took a deep breath. "I spoke with Agent Monroe. She told me you worked with her for weeks. You knew who Sophie was before Christmas Eve." "Yes," I said. "You let me bring her here. You let me plan that dinner. You let me think she loved me." I looked at him, the man who was once my boy. I had to be sure. If I had warned you too soon, she would have vanished before anyone could stop her. He leaned forward, voice trembling with anger. "So you lied to me. You looked me in the eye every day and pretended everything was fine." "I didn't pretend," I said softly. "I waited." "That's not the same thing." "No," I admitted. "It's not." He stood up abruptly, pushing the chair back so hard it scraped the floor. "Do you even hear yourself? You think this is noble, don't you? You think you saved me. But you didn't. You destroyed something I believed in." His words cut deeper than he knew. I had spent a lifetime teaching others that truth was a gift. Yet in this house, truth had turned to ash. "I didn't want to destroy anything," I said, "but I couldn't let her take you from yourself." Andrew laughed bitterly. "You think I'm that naive?" "Yes," I said, "because you are my son, because you trust too easily, because your heart still believes people mean what they say." He looked at me for a long time, his expression hard, unreadable. "You could have told me the truth, Mom. I would have believed you." I shook my head. "No, you wouldn't have. Not then. You were in love. You would have defended her. You would have turned against me. And she would have won." He exhaled, running his hands through his hair. "So you decided for me." "I decided for both of us." Silence filled the kitchen again. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the window pane, carrying the brittle sound of tree branches tapping against the glass. Andrew finally sat back down, his anger dimming into exhaustion. "You should have trusted me," he said. "I did," I whispered. "That's why I didn't tell you. I trusted that when you saw the truth, you would understand." He stared at the table, his jaw tight. "I lost everything, Mom. My job knows about the investigation. The story is spreading. People think I was part of it. I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't fix it." I looked down at my hands. The veins beneath my skin seemed darker now, the years showing themselves more honestly than before. "I know," I said. "Some things can't be fixed." He stood again and walked to the window, staring out at the lake. "You think you did the right thing, don't you?" I thought about it before answering. There are times when doing the right thing costs more than doing nothing. But yes, I would do it again. He turned sharply. "Even knowing it would destroy what we had?" "Yes," I said, and my voice did not tremble. "Because what we had was already at risk. Not because of her, but because I failed to protect you before. When you were a boy, I could stop the pain before it reached you. Now, all I can do is help you see where it comes from." His eyes filled with tears, and he looked away quickly. "You don't get to decide which lessons I learn." "Maybe not," I said, "but I could not stand by and watch you be deceived." Not again. Not when I could still do something. The clock on the wall ticked, counting the seconds of our distance. Andrew's voice broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if the truth is worth it? All the time, I said, but lies rot slower than truth. And I could not live with the smell. He stared at me for a moment longer, then rubbed his hands over his face. You sound like Dad. I hope so. The light shifted, softer now, as if the afternoon had decided to forgive us for surviving it. Andrew sat down again, quieter. The anger had not disappeared, but it had cooled into something smaller, something human. I loved her, he said finally. I know. And I hate that I still do. That too will fade, I said gently, but not easily. He looked at me then, not as a son betrayed, but as a man beginning to understand that love and pain often arrive together. His eyes were tired, but not empty. What happens now? He asked. You heal, I said. You work, you find yourself again, and I stop trying to live your life for you. A faint, reluctant smile touched his mouth. You? Stop interfering? Eventually, I said. When I'm sure you won't fall again. He laughed, quiet but real, the kind of laugh that carries both grief and forgiveness in its breath. We sat there for a long time, neither speaking. The sun had begun to set, spilling a thin layer of gold across the frozen lake. The house, for the first time in weeks, felt alive again, not healed, but breathing. Before he left, Andrew turned to me. You didn't just save me, he said softly. You made sure I would never see love the same way again. I met his gaze steadily. Then maybe you'll see it more clearly next time. When the door closed behind him, I stood by the window and watched him walk to his car. The snow cracked beneath his steps, each one marking the distance between us and what had been lost. I returned to the kitchen and sat down in the fading light. The house was quiet, the air still carrying the faint scent of roasted chicken and old pine. I closed my eyes and let the silence settle. There are moments when doing the right thing does not bring peace, only emptiness. But sometimes that emptiness is the only honest ground left to stand on. I whispered into the room, not as an apology, but as truth. If I could go back, I would still do it. The words stayed in the air, fragile yet unbroken, like the first breath after a storm. Late winter to early spring, Lake Madison and Nice. The morning after Andrew left with more questions than answers, Agent Monroe called with a new piece of the puzzle. Christina Marsh had asked for a private conversation with her attorney present. She wanted to cooperate, not out of guilt, Monroe said, but because cooperation sometimes buys time. In that conversation, Christina confirmed something I had suspected since the second dinner. The name she used was real, but it did not belong to her. She did not invent Sophie Laurent, Monroe said. She borrowed it. There is a real woman behind the file, Christina waved around like a passport. The idea sat on my desk like a second cup of untouched coffee. Somewhere a stranger had been stripped of the most basic anchor a person can hold. Her name. I thought of the plate that had shattered, the glass that had fallen, the notebook open on my table like a small, stubborn light. I asked Monroe for the true details and called Emily. It took Emily 2 days to find her. Camille Laurent, 29, assistant hotel manager in Nice, formerly enrolled at a hospitality program in Lyon, with a bank account frozen after suspicious international activity 2 months earlier. No criminal record, no travel to the United States. A digital footprint that looked like a person who lived a steady life and never expected to become a story. We sent an email first, careful and clear. It felt indecent to reach across a continent with the words "You do not know me" from a kitchen in Wisconsin, yet there was no graceful way to begin. Emily used her government address. I added a short message of my own, and we asked if Camille would agree to a video call with Agent Monroe present. The reply came the same evening. Yes, she wrote, I would like to understand what happened to my name. On the call, her face filled my laptop screen. She had brown hair pulled into a neat knot and the composed manner of someone who dealt with difficult guests and tired travelers with the same measured patience. When she smiled, it was cautious. When she spoke, her voice carried the south of France, warm and salt-touched. Christina used more than your name, Monroe explained. She patterned a life from your public records, a school in Lyon, a hotel in Nice. She was counting on the distance to keep you quiet. Camille nodded, her expression steady, then faltered. My bank called in November. They said my accounts were flagged. I thought it was a mistake. Then my manager asked about a message from a man in Oregon who believed he had worked with me. I told him I have never been to the United States. He looked at me as if I was lying. I recognized the look she described. Doubt can be a quiet violence. It settles on a face before it finds its words. I am sorry, I said. It felt small, but it was true. What is she like? Camille asked. This woman who wore my name. I hesitated. There are many ways to answer a question like that. I chose caution. She knows how to be who you want her to be. She studies a room the way a thief studies a lock. And she is not alone. Camille rubbed her temple, a gesture of fatigue more than frustration. I want this to end, she said. I want my name to feel like mine again. Then come here, I heard myself say. Let us help you reclaim it in the place where it was most abused. Monroe's eyebrows rose a fraction, then she nodded. We can support a temporary visa for a victim interview. It will help the case. It will also help the banks unwind the damage. 2 weeks later, in late February, I waited at the small regional airport while snow turned to rain. When she walked through the sliding doors, she held a simple leather suitcase and looked around with a focus that suggested she was cataloging exits and faces and possibilities. She saw me, and something in her softened. We had spoken almost every day since the call. Familiarity builds bridges where paperwork cannot. Welcome to Wisconsin, I said, and we laughed at how strange that sentence sounded. At home, I set a cup of tea in front of her and watched her look at the walls, the photographs, the quiet order of a life that had been shaken and was trying to settle again. She touched the spine of a book on the side table, glanced at the pendulum clock, and breathed in as if scent could tell a story the eyes might miss. You remind me of my grandmother, she said. She kept her house like this, everything in its place, even after my grandfather died. I smiled. Order is the only argument I have with time. The next morning we met Monroe at her office. Forms, statements, copies of records, a slow geometry of proof. Camille sat with a calm that I recognized as courage. She did not tremble when she signed, but she paused before each page, as if acknowledging the ground that signature would reclaim. We called her bank together and worked through layers of verification until the account could breathe again. We contacted the hotel's parent company with documentation from Monroe's office that cleared her of involvement. The manager in Nice sent an email back within an hour. We misjudged, he wrote. Please accept our apology. Camille exhaled as if her ribs had been unlaced. In the evenings we cooked. She taught me a simple Provençal fish stew that tasted like the memory of summer. I showed her how to make the apple pie Andrew loved as a boy. We washed dishes slowly and talked about the minor dignities no one counts until they are gone. Having a key that opens your own door. Seeing your name printed correctly on the bottom of a receipt. Hearing a friend say, I know who you are. On the third night, she asked to see the room where I keep the old notebooks. We sat on the floor while the clock ticked and turned pages smeared with chalk and ink and the dust of years. She told me about the first time she checked a guest into a hotel on her own. I told her about the student who failed my class and thanked me for teaching him how to fail with grace. We spoke about loss without dramatics and about love without its false costumes. I lost my name, she said quietly. You lost your trust. Yes, I said. Both are heavier than they sound. She tapped the leather cover of my French notebook. But sitting here, I feel like I am in the right story again. So do I. The next week, Andrew came by with cautious curiosity. He had heard about Camille, but had not asked to meet her. When he stepped into the kitchen, she stood and offered her hand. I am the woman who did not know I was in your life, she said with a wry smile. He looked startled, then relieved. "I am the man who did not know who he was loving," he replied, and for a moment they both laughed at the awkward mercy of honesty. They spoke for an hour. He asked her about Nice. She asked him about the projects he builds when winter finally yields. When he left, he hugged me and said, almost shyly, "She is real." It was the highest praise he could imagine giving another person. On Camille's last day in Wisconsin, the sky softened into a blue that looked like a promise. We drove to the lake and walked along the edge of the thaw, boots crunching in sand that remembered ice. She took a small envelope from her coat and pressed it into my hand. Inside was a printed photograph from the hotel lobby, a candid of a young manager helping an older guest with a heavy suitcase. On the back, she had written, in French and English, a simple line. "She lost her name, I lost my trust." But when we sat together, both of us found ourselves again. When I dropped her at the airport, she hugged me with the intimacy of family found by accident. "If you ever come to Nice," she said, "I will show you the sea you have been missing." "Bring the recipe for the stew," I said. "I will bring the pie." Back home, I placed the photograph beside the pendulum clock and the shard of blue magnolia that I had refused to throw away. The circle was not neat, and perhaps it never would be, but it was closed enough to live inside. That evening, I called Andrew. His voice was tired but open. "How are you?" I asked. "Better," he said. "Not healed, but better." "Me too," I answered. After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the last light leave the lake. The name Christina would keep lawyers busy for months. The banks would keep their ledgers busy for even longer. But in this house, in this small life that had carried so much weight, something had shifted toward the honest center. I opened my notebook and wrote a final line on the page that held the first entry about Sophie. Names can be stolen, but identity is a practice. Trust can be broken, but it can also be taught how to walk again. 2 months later, Sonoma Valley, California. The sunlight over Sonoma was unlike any I had known in Wisconsin. It was softer, but brighter, as if the air itself carried forgiveness. The vineyards stretched endlessly across rolling hills, their leaves turning gold under the late afternoon sky. From where I stood, I could hear laughter carried by the wind, the faint clink of glasses, and the sound of life rebuilding itself. Andrew and Camille had chosen this place for reasons that made sense only to those who had survived loss. It was not grand, not expensive, but it was honest. A small vineyard with wildflowers in the grass and an old wooden arch covered in vines. The ceremony was simple. No choir, no polished speeches, only people who had been broken enough to understand the value of mending. When Andrew saw Camille walking toward him, his hands trembled slightly. She wore a cream-colored dress that caught the sun like water, her hair loose around her shoulders. There was no performance, no pretense, just two people who had learned the difference between pretending and believing. I sat near the front, my hands folded around a small bouquet of rosemary and lavender. Robert would have liked her, I thought. She had the quiet strength of someone who knew the cost of identity and the price of starting again. When she reached Andrew, he smiled in a way I had not seen since he was a boy, unfiltered, unguarded, real. The vows were short. He promised to listen before judging, to trust without surrendering his discernment. She promised to stay, not out of need, but choice. When they exchanged rings, I felt something inside me settle, like a wound finally closing. After the ceremony, we gathered beneath the oak trees where the tables were set with wine, bread, and the scent of ripe grapes. Emily had flown in from Washington, radiant and proud, and Agent Monroe sent a note from her office in Chicago. Justice doesn't always arrive in courtrooms. Sometimes it walks quietly into a vineyard and sits beside forgiveness. I stood for a long time before speaking. My son had asked me to say a few words, and I had tried all week to find the right ones. But words, like truth, come best when they are unforced. When the moment arrived, I rose slowly, the sunlight falling across the tablecloths like liquid gold. Faces turned toward me. Andrew and Camille, my family, women from the local widows' club who had traveled all the way from Madison. They called themselves the Silver Hearts now, a name that began as a joke and became a promise. I took a deep breath and began. I used to think love was something you earned, I said. Something proven through effort, sacrifice, and endurance. I thought the people we lose define what remains of us. But I was wrong. The people we help, those we protect, those we choose to forgive, define us far more. The crowd was silent. The breeze rustled the vines. I saw Camille take Andrew's hand. Not long ago, I continued, I watched my son lose faith in everything he believed about love. I watched myself lose faith in what trust could mean. And then a stranger came into our lives, not the woman who stole, but the woman who was stolen from. And through her, we remembered that healing isn't about forgetting what broke us. It's about learning to live as if we were never meant to stay broken. I paused, the weight of those words lingering. I have learned that true love doesn't need a passport or a promise written in ink. It needs honesty, even when honesty hurts. It needs courage, even when courage costs us comfort. And it needs patience, the kind that outlives fear. I smiled at Camille, who wiped a tear from her cheek. So to the two of you, I say this. May you never confuse perfection with peace. May your home always have space for truth, no matter how inconvenient it feels. And may you remember that love is not what you find, it's what you keep giving, even when it has nothing left to prove. When I finished, the small crowd applauded softly. The sound felt less like celebration and more like acknowledgement. The kind of clapping people do when they understand something too deeply to put into words. Later that evening, as the sun fell behind the hills, I walked to the edge of the vineyard alone. The light was amber now, slanting low through the vines. I could hear music behind me, faint and content. In my hands I carried a small box. Inside was a new crystal glass identical in shape to the one that had shattered on Christmas Eve. I had ordered it from a craftsman in Lyon, the same city where I once studied as a girl. I set it gently on the wooden table beneath the trees. The last rays of sunlight caught its edges, scattering them into hundreds of tiny reflections across the grass. It looked both fragile and enduring, exactly as life should. For a moment I thought I saw Robert beside me, smiling that quiet smile he used to give when I was right about something he had doubted. I did not turn to look. Some memories live best in the corner of the eye. As the stars began to rise, Camille came to stand beside me. "You're thinking of him," she said softly. "I always am," I replied. "But tonight it feels lighter, like he's somewhere nearby, nodding along." She nodded too. "He must be proud. You protected what mattered." "Perhaps," I said, "but I think we protected each other." The night deepened, the vineyard glowing with strings of soft lights. Laughter floated through the air again, this time without shadows. When I returned home a few days later, I found a letter waiting in my mailbox. It was from a woman named Janet, a member of the Silver Hearts Club. She had watched the video of my speech that Emily had posted online. The letter was simple. "You reminded me that being alone doesn't mean being forgotten. Thank you for speaking for women like us." I placed the letter on my desk beside the new glass. It caught the morning light through the window, scattering it into fragments of gold and white. I traced the rim with my fingertip, hearing the faint echo of its twin that had shattered months before. In that moment, I understood something I had been circling all along. Every story that ends leaves behind a new beginning, waiting for someone else to find the courage to tell it. I opened my notebook, the one that had carried me through the storm, and wrote the final words of my story. No one reaches old age unscarred, but some of us learn to wear those scars like armor. To speak, not just for ourselves, but for those who still live in silence. Because sometimes, a story told at the right time can be a shield for another woman's heart. And as I closed the book, I whispered the only truth that had survived everything. We are never too old to begin again. If you believe that every woman, no matter her age, deserves respect, dignity, and love that is real, subscribe and stay with us. Together, we will keep telling stories like this one. Because every story shared can become a shield for someone else. Epilogue. The story beyond the story. Every life, no matter how ordinary it may seem, carries a moment when everything changes. For Helen Whitaker, it was a single evening in winter that taught her the true weight of silence, the cost of love, and the quiet strength of beginning again. From betrayal to forgiveness, from fear to wisdom, her journey became more than a mother's story. It became a reflection of what it means to protect, to endure, and to rise after everything falls apart. In the end, she did not win through anger or revenge. She found peace in truth, grace in imperfection, and courage in connection. And through her, we are reminded that life's most powerful victories rarely come from loud triumphs, but from the small, steady decision to stand back up, to choose kindness over bitterness and honesty over comfort. Perhaps your life has had a moment like that too, a time when you had to decide between silence and truth, love and self-respect, loss and renewal. Maybe you are still standing in that moment now. If Helen's story has touched something inside you, let it be a reminder that you are not alone. Healing takes time, but it begins the instant you share your truth. So tell your story, speak it aloud, or write it down. Someone out there may need your words more than you know. And if this story has meant something to you, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might see themselves in it, and subscribe to Grandma's Final Chapter. Together, we can keep bringing stories like Helen's to light, stories of resilience, love, and the beauty of rediscovering ourselves at any age. Because sometimes, one person's story can become another person's strength, and that is how healing begins.